In the beginning of the Reformation, not many people understood the idea of religious reform, for at the time the nation was Catholic, and no other religion existed in England, so there was no alternative.
One thing that's very important to understand is that King Henry was, for most of his life, a very devout Roman Catholic. And this might have been a political stance as much as a religious stance. But when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the door of the church in Germany, it was King Henry who was opposed to that. In fact, he wrote a letter denouncing Martin Luther, and as a result, the Pope at the time gave Henry the title Defender of the Faith.
Just after ascending to the throne, King Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon, his late cousin Arthur's wife. Catherine failed to produce a male heir to the throne, and only had a daughter, whom they named Mary.
As time went on, Henry, for his own political reasons, wanted to divorce his wife. The reason being is that he had not had a son, and he needed a son to be heir to the throne, in a sense, again, politically.
Well, Catherine he had married, and she couldn't have any male heirs, or didn't. She had Mary, which of course led to consequences. But then he decided to get the marriage annulled. He went to Wolsey, and Wolsey said, "You can't do this. You're Catholic, I'm Catholic. It can't be done." And in a pique, he had Wolsey locked up and was going to Wolsey was never going to see the light of day again. But in fact, what happened was that Wolsey died before he had an opportunity to kill him.
After being denied by Cardinal Wolsey, the king made his case to Pope Clement VII, who was equally displeased with his request and put off making any final decision in the matter, as he was also dealing with other political issues that required his attention.
Too busy with other things. So in fact, what Henry did was go to Cranmer, who was a reformer, and Henry at that point was probably thinking that he was going to rid himself of the Catholics altogether and have a new church, which became the Church of England, in fact. So that's what he did, and Cranmer played along with it, and he eventually declared Catherine an incompetent wife and annulled the marriage.
He then immediately married Anne Boleyn in hopes of siring an heir to his throne, and began making plans to ensure his place as the new head of the English Church with the instatement of Thomas Cranmer as the Archbishop of Canterbury. In November 1534, he passed the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Succession.
So Henry decided that he would push through two acts. An act of supremacy, which made him the head of the church, and also he had an act of succession, so that his issue via Anne Boleyn could inherit the throne, or was meant to inherit the throne.
Although most agreed to submit to these changes, not all deemed Henry as the rightful leader of the church and refused to see him as the sole power of the English church. Thomas More and John Fisher were some of the most notorious for opposing the king and were executed on the grounds of high treason.
You know, for many generations, the Bible was, Holy Scripture was always published and produced in Latin. You know, of course there was Aramaic, Greek, Hebrew, but eventually when the Church of Rome became the predominating religious power, everyone knew Scripture in Latin. Not only was Scripture in Latin, but the Mass, the Eucharist, the liturgies were all in Latin too. And one of the things that people felt were very important was that if you kept things in a language that people didn't understand, you could use that power to control or manipulate them. And you know, if you don't know what I'm saying, then you can't actually say anything about it. Now, a lot of people right around the same time in England, in Switzerland, in Germany, believed that Holy Scripture and the liturgies should be written in the common language, the vernacular. This happened in England in 1535 with the Coverdale Bible. This was the first complete English translation of the Bible. And what it allowed people to do was to hear and read for themselves Holy Scripture. This is possibly one of the most important theological elements of the English Reformation, or of the Reformation in general. People being able to read for themselves Holy Scripture, to interpret it for themselves, and then, of course, through that interpretation, to hold accountable the church that had been, in a lot of ways, oppressing and controlling them.
In 1538, Henry VIII ordered the new Bible, now in English, to be placed in all the parishes in England. By 1547, Henry had solidified his place at the head of the church, and on his deathbed, had made extensive changes to the country as a whole. He died with Cranmer by his side, as well as his son, Edward VI, who became the new King of England.
When Edward took the throne at the age of 9, he was really not able to do the job, and Cranmer, in the end, just simply stepped in and acted for him and became, in effect, the king.
Without much life experience, he took the throne in his father's footsteps and continued his work along with Cranmer, who became one of his chief advisors.
Cranmer was able to pass the Act of Uniformity, and that enabled him to impose his prayer book, his translation of the prayer book, which was in vernacular English, and make it uniform throughout the realm, which was a new thing. So in fact, people were able to simply participate in the service, which they'd never been able to do before.
Edward died not long after, in 1553, not having achieved a great deal except for allowing Cranmer free rein in Parliament and making the new church have a more Protestant feel. Mary I became queen after returning to London and claiming her title.
She, being a devout Catholic, an ardent Catholic, got rid of the Act of Supremacy, got rid of the Act of Uniformity, got rid of the Book of Common Prayer, and generally turned the place back into a Catholic country.
The Queen repealed their efforts further by having Thomas Cranmer imprisoned, as well as having her half-sister, Elizabeth, locked in the Tower of London during her reign. Cranmer was eventually convicted and burnt at the stake for his crimes against the Catholic Church.
It was very traumatic, and there was a lot of turmoil. People were executed, people were forced to flee England at the time. There was a massive civil war, iconoclasm, the destruction of stained glass windows, and this Protestant sense of as the people, we've read the scriptures and we understand how it should be. The interpretation of them should be in the hands of the people.
Elizabeth did not agree with her sister's bloody, treacherous rule, and restored the changes Henry VIII made at the beginning of the Reformation. She also attempted to find a middle ground between the two religions. She practiced via media, or the middle way. The Reformation had a large impact on the world today, and it all started with the defiance of King Henry VIII and his stance against the Catholic Church. He shaped England's history, and as well as leaving a lineage of successors that held their own mark on society.